Does anyone else remember the time when the UFC were trying to push two fighters to be the future of MMA? I do. The year was 2015 when they had Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey coming up onto the scene and absolutely dominating their divisions. You had Conor McGregor, the male fighter, and Ronda Rousey, the female fighter, and both of these were doing great pay-per-view numbers, and the UFC were thinking into the future who are going to be the female fighter, the male fighter to carry the UFC for the next 5-10 years, and they landed on Sage Northcutt and Paige VanZant. And now you fast forward almost 10 years ahead to 2024, and I think it's safe to say that the future of MMA isn't quite going the way that the UFC thought it would. Because if you're new to MMA, you might not have a clue who Sage is, you might not have a clue who Paige is, but if you do know MMA and you have been around for a while, you should know the names and know why they didn't end up fulfilling their potential. And we're going to start off with Sage Northcutt. The start of Sage Northcutt's career was absolutely perfect. In his first 5 fights, all of them came by finish, and in his 6th fight is when he made his UFC debut, where he was only 19 years old. And again, just like the start of his MMA career, his UFC debut went, he passed it with flying colours and got the knockout in the very first round within a minute. After this, he had his second appearance in the UFC where he got a guillotine choke in the second round. So things were looking really good for Sage Northcutt, and I bet the UFC were putting their hands together, hoping that it was going to pay off. But after this, he came across Bryan Barberena, who managed to submit him in the second round. Now, for those who don't know, Bryan Barberena is a very solid fighter, a UFC veteran at this point. So I'm not going to say it was a bad loss or anything, because, like I say, Bryan Barberena, he's been around the block now. He's got a few wins and losses here against some elite opposition, so not a bad loss to have on your record, especially for how young he was. He was only around, 20 at the time? 19, 20 at the time, so losing to Bryan Barberena, no shame in that at all. He then bounced back months later and got a victory at UFC 200, which would have been great for Sage Northcutt, considering that UFC 200 was a massive event, the biggest UFC pay-per-view of all time at that point in time. But then after this, he went and lost to Mickey Gall. And now, if you don't know Mickey Gall, he is the guy, pretty much, who became somewhat big because he beat CM Punk. He was CM Punk made his UFC debut against Mickey Gall, and Mickey Gall defeated CM Punk. While Sage Northcutt also suffered defeat against Mickey Gall, and, Mickey Gall just ended up becoming not that good, really. I think he ended up losing to, a very washed and old Diego Sanchez, and just very hit and miss. I believe he's still fighting in the UFC as well. Then, Sage Northcutt, after this loss to Mickey Gall, didn't fight for the rest of 2016 and came back in late 2017 and managed to pick up a unanimous decision victory. Again, after this, he got another unanimous decision victory. And then after this, he managed to get his last appearance on the UFC contract, where he got a win with a second round knockout. So he made his UFC debut in 2015. And then his last fight in the UFC came in 2018. So he only spent 3 years in the UFC. And that could be a reason to why not many people may know of Sage Northcutt, because he was only there for a very small amount of time. I believe the reason he didn't sign the UFC, he wasn't really happy with the offer, so he went over to One Championship, and it didn't go that well. He got fucking done in. He got knocked out cold in the first round within 30 seconds, and he really wasn't good for Sage Northcutt. It never will be good when you get knocked out in the first round, especially making your debut. After this, a cancelled bout, and then after this, he got a finish in the first round against Ahmad Mujtaba, whatever, in 2023, and then he had a bout cancelled in this year, the start of this year, and there was a bit of controversy there, and this has all led to him being released from One Championship. Or maybe he didn't renew it, whatever. He's no longer with One Championship. And it's just crazy to me that this guy was meant to be the future of MMA, or the UFC wanted him that to be the case. And now he's not fighting for the UFC. He had 2 appearances in One Championship and went 1-1. And now he's no longer fighting for One Championship. It's just a bit crazy to me. And he's, now only 28? 12-3 record, which isn't a bad record, to be fair. Only 28. Could we see him back in the UFC? I'm not entirely sure. I mean, he's affiliated with Team Alpha Male, which is, you know, they have some ties with UFC, given with like Uriah Faber and whatnot. So maybe we could see him back in the UFC. There's still plenty of time for Sage Northcutt, but I don't think the same can be said for Paige VanZant. Now, to start off Paige's MMA career, she got off to a flying start with a 2-0 record, but then she came across Tisha Pennington. At the time, I think she was Tisha Torres, but now she's going out with Raquel Pennington. Maybe some of you know who Tisha Pennington is. She was actually a really good fighter in the UFC. I believe she's still fighting for the UFC as well. Was very good in her prime, to be honest with you. I remember she gave was it Zhang Weili? She gave quite a hard fight too. But yeah, so she lost to Tisha Pennington. Not really that bad. She was only young at the time, but regardless of taking a loss, she got a victory in the next one at Cage Wars in the first round via submission, and that led straight to a UFC debut with a 3-1 record, which is quite crazy. But again, very, very young, and she had a nice little run to start off a UFC stint. She had a win in round 3 by knockout, TKO. Sorry. After this, she got Felice Herrig, who's also quite well known, a unanimous decision victory against her, and then she beat Alex Chambers by armbar in the 3rd round. So not a bad little start for Paige VanZant, but then she came across Thug Rose. Now, obviously, we all know how good Thug Rose is. Former champion, twice now, I believe. Very, very good fighter, and Thug Rose was able to get rid of it in the 5th round. So this must have been a main event for a Fight Night card, which is quite crazy, to be honest with you, for a 6-1 fighter against Rose, who was, I don't know, what a rate of 3-2. Like that is pretty crazy, to be fair. But Rose got the job done against Paige VanZant. After this, she got a very nice knockout. This went maybe a bit viral when she got a knockout over Bec Rawlings in 2016, and that was a really nice knockout. Bec Rawlings, I believe she does bare knuckle boxing now. I'm not entirely sure, but she's still lingering about doing something. She then lost to Michelle Watson Gomez. This is when Michelle Watson Gomez was like coming up a bit, to be fair, so no shame in that really, but Michelle Watson Gomez had her way with Paige VanZant. Had a cancelled bout against Jessica Ai. She then lost a unanimous decision victory against Jessica Rose Clark. After this, a year later in 2019, she beat Rachel Ostovich, and I'm pretty sure Rachel Ostovich was pretty known for being quite shit, to be honest with you. But regardless, she then came across Amanda Ribas, and to be honest, Amanda Ribas at this time, I believe, she wasn't undefeated, but she was on a nice little run. Decent prospect, and Amanda Ribas absolutely wiped the floor of Paige VanZant. Like, she just sliced through. It was quite an easy, comfortable win. I remember this during lockdown time. Yeah, she just went straight through it. So then she got released by the UFC. She wasn't with the UFC anymore after being 8-4, which, you know, isn't really the best. In all fairness, 3 of the 4 losses did come against like fighters who were like somewhat, maybe not elite, but, you know, in the top 15 at the very least. So nothing too terrible. But she never seemed like she was really improving when it came to MMA. So then what did she do? She went to bare knuckle boxing. Yeah, she went to bare knuckle boxing, and yeah, not really the brightest of moves, I'll be honest with you. She lost her debut in bare knuckle boxing, and then she had another fight a few months later in the same year, 2021, and lost to Rachel Ostovich, whatever her name was, who she beat in MMA, and she lost to her in bare knuckle boxing. And then after this, she took a little sidestep away from MMA and actually did some pro wrestling, you know, like how you have WWE. Well, there's another company called AEW, and she actually did a bit of AEW. I believe she did have a match, but I don't believe that she stayed in AEW for long. For those who don't know, what is it? Dan Lambert, what's the names now? Who American Top Team, who Dustin Poirier, Jorge Masvidal, Colby Covington, a load of big names train at. Well, they have a lot of run-ins with AEW, so you used to see Colby Covington on some wrestling like TNA all these years back. And then they had a whole thing with American Top Team invading AEW, I believe. You had Junior Dos Santos, and you had, I can't remember what other fighters, but you had various other MMA fighters making the leap over to pro wrestling, but I don't think anything really stuck with any of them. And then she went on to Misfits Boxing. Just gets fucking worse and worse, doesn't it? She went to Misfits Boxing, and she drew against Albrook. Yeah, I'm not gonna act like I watched the fight. I don't know if it was a robbery. I don't know if it should have been a draw. I don't know if Al Brook should have won. Don't know if Paige VanZant should have won. But fuck me, from going from being the future of MMA to drawing to an OF person on boxing, like, but to do a boxing is just crazy, really. Like, that's just such a big downfall. And then now she's gone to slap fighting, and I don't believe this is fully updated because I believe she actually fought recently on slap fighting, got a draw on that as well. And yeah, so now she's gone to slap fighting, which is connected with the UFC, power slap. Because obviously Dana White has a hard on for power slap right now, which is crazy. But yeah, she's doing power slap now, so it's just quite crazy to see how the two fighters who are meant to be the future of MMA have really took a downfall. With Sage, I do feel for him a bit because, you know, but then again, he did lose to some... Mickey Gall was a really bad loss. And he's still only young, whereas Paige VanZant, it's a bit more different. She's had it a lot more worse. And you can only blame myself, really. Like, this is really bad. I can't really sugarcoat it. Like, her record in the end... 8-5. You know, in all fairness, you have a lot of female fighters in the UFC with a record similar to that. And like I said, she did only really lose to like 3 of the 4 losses that were like against somewhat elite opposition. She is only 30, so I suppose she could pull it back, but let's be honest, will she? Probably fucking not. So what actually happened to the future of MMA? They simply weren't good enough. If you were an MMA fan in 2015, what did you think of the potential of Sage Northcutt and Paige VanZant? Obviously, we now know that they flopped and they aren't actually the future of MMA, but what did you think that their ceiling was? Did you think they would flop? Or do you think that they were going to go on to win UFC titles? Let me know in the comments. If you have enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.